I never thought it would come to this. I muttered under my breath as I set the table, the silverware gleaming under the warm kitchen light, the smell of freshly baked apple pie filling the room, each detail meticulously arranged because it was supposed to be a celebration, a simple family dinner at my modest suburban home in Minnesota, where I had spent decades cultivating a sense of warmth and tradition for my family. Yet tonight, there was a tension I couldn't ignore, a subtle undercurrent, that made my hands tremble ever so slightly as I placed the last plate down, noticing the faint dust of flour still clinging to the countertop from my morning baking, and the small stack of handwritten place cards, each one labeled neatly in my careful handwriting, a name from my past intertwined with decades of memories. And I paused to breathe, listening to the silence that hung heavier than the scent of cinnamon and sugar, a silence that spoke of absence, of expectation gone unmet, and the front door opened gently, the familiar click echoing across the hardwood floor. And there she was, Samantha, my daughter-in-law, her smile polished, her eyes calculating in ways I had long learned to read, as Wade lingered slightly behind, avoiding my gaze, as if rehearsed, as if the years of Sunday dinners and shared holidays had been erased with a single unspoken agreement, and I smiled faintly, a gesture more of endurance than joy, because I knew the game had begun, because I could sense the shift in energy, the invisible lines being drawn, the unspoken rules she expected me to follow, and I served the first plate with deliberate calm, noticing how Samantha placed her napkin with precise care, her glance brushing over the old family photos on the wall with a subtle disdain, a reminder of the life I had built with love and patience, and I caught the faintest smirk from Wade as he looked toward his wife, a silent acknowledgement of complicity, and still I moved through the motions, folding the linens, pouring water, arranging forks and knives with methodical precision, because I had learned that sometimes the smallest acts held the greatest power, that silence could speak louder than confrontation, and as I did, I allowed my mind to wander through memories of Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, graduations, and quiet evenings spent reading. Together, all those moments where care had been given freely, trust assumed, and now weighed against the subtle cruelty of being sidelined, and the thought settled into my chest, not like anger, but like a sharp clarity, a recognition that tonight was a test, a moment that would reveal not weakness, but the resilience and ingenuity I had carried through my 72 years, and I continued placing the final touch. A small vase of daisies picked from the garden earlier that morning, their white petals a quiet witness to my composure, and I straightened, took a deep breath, and looked at Samantha and Wade, knowing that every calculated smile and gentle word I would offer tonight would conceal a strategy, a plan unfolding in silence, a narrative only I could orchestrate. And with that thought, I stepped back slightly, letting the atmosphere settle, a calm exterior masking the storm within, aware that the night had only just begun, that the first move had been made, and I was ready to respond, not with anger, but with precision, patience, and quiet authority. The evening light filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the hardwood floor as I carried the first plate to the dining table, each step measured and deliberate, the aroma of roasted chicken mingling with the faint scent of lemon from the freshly polished silverware, and I noted how Samantha's eyes flicked toward the china cabinet with that subtle, almost imperceptible calculation that made my chest tighten just slightly, not from anger, but from recognition that the game had begun in earnest, and Wade hovered behind, shuffling his feet as if uncertain where to stand, a hesitation that spoke volumes without words, and I placed the plate down carefully, hearing the slight scrape against the oak surface, noticing the way Samantha adjusted her napkin, smoothing it with precise, almost exaggerated care, while Wade nodded as though he were rehearsing some unspoken script, and I poured water into each glass, steady and methodical, listening to the faint clink of ice against glass, a rhythm that grounded me in the ordinary while the tension built imperceptibly, a quiet counterpoint to the storm simmering beneath polished smiles and well-mannered conversation. And as I moved to arrange the silverware for the next course, my mind traced the countless Sundays past, the dinners I had prepared with love, the holidays carefully orchestrated to bring laughter and warmth into a home that was now quietly testing my patience. and the realization settled that Samantha had been subtly manipulating these gatherings for years, shaping them in ways to elevate her presence and minimize mine. And I continued setting the table, the weight of every plate and fork feeling heavier as I contemplated the silent choreography of power in this room, yet I remained composed. My fingers steady, my back straight, every movement precise, each one a demonstration of restraint and subtle authority, a way to assert control without raising a voice, without letting anyone know the depth of awareness I carried within. And I noticed how the light caught the faint streaks of gray in my hair, the delicate lines on my hands, each a testament to years of care and vigilance. And I allowed a small smile to play at the corner of my lips, not one of amusement, but of quiet resolve. An acknowledgement that while Samantha and Wade might think they held the upper hand, I had observed, I had understood, and I would respond on my own terms, letting the ordinary tasks of the evening unfold, using the cadence of routine to mask the careful calculations forming in my mind, the plan that would slowly reveal itself without haste, every gesture measured, every word chosen for effect. And as I sat briefly to adjust the centerpiece, a simple bouquet of daisies that I had arranged that morning, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to feel the clarity of purpose settling in my chest, a calm focus that contrasted with the subtle unease radiating from Samantha. And I knew that this night, like many others before it, would pass under my careful observation, every action catalogued, every nuance noted, a silent record that would inform the steps I would take. And in the quiet hum of the house, the distant tick of the wall clock marking the passage of each deliberate minute, I felt a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that patience was a weapon, that observation was power, and that in this carefully measured evening, every small detail, every controlled motion, was part of a strategy that only I fully understood, a strategy that would unfold in time, revealing the truth of who truly held influence within these walls. The conversation drifted into a low hum of polite exchanges as we moved into the dining room, the soft clatter of silver against porcelain punctuating the uneasy calm, and I noticed how Samantha had taken care to place herself at the head of the table, subtly asserting authority while Wade lingered just behind her, hands folded in a way that suggested both obedience and caution, and I poured the wine with deliberate slowness, letting the liquid settle into each glass with a gentle swirl, observing their expressions, noting the faint flicker of impatience in Samantha's eyes as she spoke lightly about her day, each word seemingly casual, yet layered with careful calculation, while Wade nodded silently, offering no interruption, his presence a quiet reinforcement of her control. And I smiled inwardly, keeping my thoughts concealed behind a veneer of calm, allowing each motion, each adjustment of a napkin or chair, to become a silent assertion of my own composure, a subtle counterweight to their orchestrated dominance. And as I set down the final plate, I allowed my eyes to wander briefly across the room, catching the faded family photographs on the wall, each image a reminder of decades of effort and care, a life meticulously built that had shaped not only this home but the habits and values of those who now sat before me. And I recognized the quiet shift in the atmosphere, the tension that Samantha could not completely mask, the small microexpressions betraying her underlying concern that perhaps I had noticed, perhaps I understood. And I moved smoothly to adjust the centerpiece, a simple arrangement of daisies from the garden, letting the action appear casual while in truth, it was a deliberate moment to center myself and measure the dynamics at play. And I listened to the low murmur of our conversation, catching the subtle inflections in tone, the pacing of responses, the way Wade occasionally hesitated, the careful modulations that betrayed their intent to influence and control, and I allowed each observation to crystallize into a plan, quiet and unspoken, where patience and timing would be my allies. And as I continued to serve, to pour, to place utensils with a practiced hand, I felt the quiet power of presence, the authority that comes not from raised voice but from steady gaze, deliberate movement, and an awareness that nothing escaped notice. And I allowed a faint nod of acknowledgement toward Samantha when she made a pointed comment, giving nothing away yet recording everything, mentally cataloging each word and gesture, understanding that in this intricate dance, my restraint, my careful attention, and my subtle responses would build the momentum for the moments yet to come, the revelations and adjustments that would unfold not with anger or confrontation, but with the meticulous, deliberate unfolding of strategy and awareness that had defined my life and would, tonight, quietly assert its force within the walls of this familiar home. As the evening wore on, the room seemed to stretch and fold in quiet tension, the soft clink of cutlery punctuating the subdued conversation, and I observed every movement with careful attention, noting the subtle shifts in Samantha's posture, the way her fingers brushed lightly against the edge of her wine glass, the slight narrowing of her eyes when Wade spoke, each gesture a silent signal of intent and expectation. And I let my own motions remain deliberate, smooth, measured, pouring water with a steady hand, placing plates with care, arranging napkins as though the act itself were a ritual of calm and control, while my mind traced the patterns of past gatherings, recollecting moments of casual cruelty masked as politeness, the small manipulations and omissions that had gradually reshaped our family dynamics, and I acknowledged them silently, allowing a soft, knowing smile to settle, not of triumph, but of clarity, a recognition that every detail was a piece of the larger puzzle. And I continued to serve the courses, noting the subtle way Samantha shifted her seat to intercept conversation, her eyes darting toward family photographs on the wall, images of milestones and celebrations, while Wade followed her lead with a quiet nod, the two of them weaving a web of influence that they assumed I had not seen, and yet I had cataloged everything. The soft laughter that carried a tinge of condescension, the carefully timed glances, the pauses in conversation designed to provoke discomfort, and I let it all settle, observing without comment, storing each piece for the moment when the balance would shift, when patience and careful timing would become my advantage. And as I adjusted the centerpiece, a simple bouquet of daisies I had arranged that morning, I allowed the light from the chandelier to catch the petals just so, creating a moment of beauty amid tension, a quiet testament to my continued presence and composure. And I noted how the shadows played across Samantha's expression, how Wade's attention flickered, uncertain, and I understood that they were aware of my awareness, that the careful control I projected had begun to unsettle them in ways unspoken yet deeply felt, and I moved with deliberate grace, placing utensils and glasses, adjusting chairs, each gesture a silent declaration of patience and poise. And I allowed myself to reflect on the life that had brought me here, the decades of care, the careful, to redirect conversation, the faint furrow in Wade's brow as he processed each exchange, and I recognized in these small moments the careful orchestration of their assumed dominance, which I had quietly anticipated, and I allowed the ordinary tasks of hosting to become a veil for my own internal planning, the careful pouring of wine, the placement of utensils, the gentle adjustment of napkins and plates, each motion deliberate, measured, and emblematic of my awareness and control. And as I set down the dessert plates, the gentle aroma of apple pie and cinnamon filling the air, I allowed my eyes to wander across the room, absorbing every detail of Samantha's posture, Wade's quiet gestures, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background, the ticking of the wall clock marking each deliberate minute. And I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that patience and careful observation were as powerful as any overt confrontation, that by maintaining my calm and steady presence, I could senses as a grounding presence, and I considered how many times these familiar motions, pouring, setting, arranging, had become a ritual of patience and quiet authority, a demonstration that composure and awareness were as potent as any spoken confrontation. And I continued to serve the next course, allowing the natural flow of the evening to mask the careful calculations unfolding in my mind, each movement deliberate, each gesture precise, while I cataloged every glance, every pause in conversation, every faint smile or hesitation, creating a mental map of intentions and reactions, and I observed how Samantha and Wade interacted, the way she subtly guided the dialogue, and how he followed with small, confirming nods, the two of them working in tandem, yet unaware of the depth of attention I brought to every detail, and I allowed my hands to move with practiced ease, setting the final plates, adjusting napkins, pouring water into glasses, actions that appeared ordinary but were imbued with an unspoken assertion of presence and control, and as I paused briefly, My eyes swept the room, the photographs on the wall, the familiar objects of our home, each a witness to years of care and tradition, and I allowed a slow, quiet smile, not of triumph, but of clarity, of understanding that each subtle observation and patient restraint built the foundation for the strategy one had been forming for years. And I noted the faint tension that lingered around Samantha, the way she tilted her head slightly, the microexpression in Wade's brow, small signals that told me that they were sensing the awareness they could not fully comprehend. And I let the ordinary tasks of the evening continue, allowing the cadence of serving and arranging to conceal the deliberate mental tracking of every word and gesture, knowing that the power of presence and careful observation would guide the unfolding of events. And as the dessert plates were placed before them, their attention momentarily caught by the aroma and sight, I let a soft, composed breath escape, a reminder to myself that patience, perception, and calm authority were the tools that would allow me to navigate the evening with precision, and that in this measured stillness, every small motion, every controlled response, was a quiet assertion of the influence I held within the familiar walls of this home, shaping the course of the night without a single raised voice, without overt confrontation, each moment building toward a subtle but inevitable clarity. As the conversation moved toward lighter topics, I continued to observe, letting each smile and comment from Samantha and Wade register without interruption, noting the subtle hesitation in their movements, the small, careful pauses before speaking, and I allowed my fingers to trace the rim of my glass as I considered the layered dynamics, the patterns of influence and control that had become familiar over the years. Each gesture and inflection cataloged silently in my mind, and I reflected on the many times I had prepared similar gatherings, the meticulous planning, the attention to every detail, the careful consideration of each guest's comfort, and I understood that those years of experience had given me insight not only into hospitality, but into the quiet negotiation of human behavior. And I let my gaze linger briefly on the photographs on the wall, images of birthdays, graduations, holidays, the accumulated memory of decades, and I allowed a soft, deliberate exhale, a reminder to myself that patience was a form of authority, that observation could shape outcomes more effectively than any raised voice. And as Samantha made a subtle comment about the pie, her tone carefully measured, I noted the slight flicker in Wade's expression, the way his eyes briefly sought reassurance, and I understood the unspoken communication between them, the collaborative effort to maintain control of the evening. And I allowed my hands to move with calm precision, adjusting a napkin here, shifting a glass there, each motion a quiet assertion of my presence, my awareness, and my composure, and I observed how Samantha's smile seemed just a little too practiced, the way Wade's nods came slightly delayed, the imperceptible signals that betrayed their need to maintain an appearance of control, and I allowed these observations to settle, reinforcing my awareness that the night's events could unfold under my quiet vigilance. Each moment noted and filed in memory, creating a map of intention and influence that would inform my responses in the hours to come, and I permitted a small, inward smile, a recognition that the calm patience I maintained, the deliberate pacing of my actions, and the steady focus of my attention all served to quietly redirect the flow of the evening, positioning me to navigate the subtle power dynamics with precision and foresight, knowing that the careful measurement of words, gestures, and reactions would ultimately reveal the balance of influence in a way that only I fully understood, and I allowed the soft glow of the chandelier to reflect across the table, the light casting gentle highlights and shadows that mirrored the quiet undercurrents of strategy and observation, a reminder that presence, awareness, and composure were quietly formidable forces in the choreography of this family gathering. As the evening drew toward its close, the soft hum of the ceiling fan mingled with the faint ticking of the wall clock, and I allowed my eyes to scan the room one final time, taking in the careful alignment of the silverware, the subtle reflections in the polished glasses, and the quiet expressions of Samantha and Wade as they conversed with a polite composure that barely concealed their underlying awareness of the shift in energy. And I permitted a small, deliberate adjustment of the napkins, smoothing the creases with gentle fingers, a simple action that held the weight of intent, a reminder to myself that precision and patience often spoke louder than any raised voice. and I reflected on the many years I had spent orchestrating family gatherings, the careful planning, the attention to detail, the cultivation of warmth and order, all of which had brought me to this point of quiet observation and careful navigation. And I noted how Samantha's gaze lingered on the table, her posture slightly rigid. The way Wade's subtle nods seemed to follow unspoken cues, and I cataloged every movement, every inflection, every measured pause, understanding the silent choreography of influence they attempted to enact. And I allowed the aroma of the dessert, warm apple pie with cinnamon and nutmeg, to settle in the room, grounding my focus as I moved to serve the plates with deliberate calm. Each placement a quiet assertion of my continued presence and control, while internally noting the microexpressions that betrayed their tension and the careful attention to their own behavior. And I allowed my mind to trace the years of shared memories, the Sunday dinners, the birthdays, the holidays, each moment a testament to the care and patience that had shaped our family. And I let a soft, inward smile rest on my lips, not one of triumph, but of understanding, of knowing that my calm observation, measured responses, and quiet authority had subtly altered the evening, that patience, perception, and restraint had created a space where truth and awareness quietly prevailed. And as I finished arranging the last plate, stepping back just slightly to observe the room, I felt the equilibrium of the moment, the silent acknowledgement that every gesture, every careful movement, every observation of the unspoken had contributed to a subtle shift in dynamics, that the evening, though appearing ordinary on the surface, had been guided by my composed awareness, and I allowed myself a slow exhale, a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that observation, patience, and deliberate action had positioned me to navigate the interactions with clarity and quiet authority, leaving no detail unnoticed, no gesture unexamined, and a subtle but unmistakable balance established within the familiar walls of my home. As the evening came to its natural close, I sat back slightly in my chair, the gentle glow of the chandelier illuminating the polished surfaces and the subtle patterns of light on the hardwood floor, and I allowed my gaze to take in the room, noting the careful posture of Samantha, the way Wade adjusted his tie, the faint micro-expressions that betrayed their awareness of my quiet scrutiny, and I felt a measured calm settle within me, a sense of accomplishment not through confrontation but through observation, through the deliberate attention to every gesture, every glance, every carefully chosen word. And I considered the many years that had led to this evening, decades of hosting, of maintaining traditions, of cultivating awareness and patience, all converging in a moment where presence and composure were tools of quiet influence. And as I slowly set aside the final dessert fork, allowing the small plate of apple pie to rest in front of Samantha with a precise, measured gesture, I observed the subtle shifts in her posture, the slight tightening of her hands, the way Wade's gaze flicked toward his mother, and I cataloged each of these with a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that patience and careful attention had given me insight into the patterns and intentions of those around me. And I reflected on the ordinary actions that carried extraordinary weight, the pouring of wine, the arrangement of napkins, the placement of plates, each small motion a declaration of presence and control. And I allowed the aroma of cinnamon and baked apples to linger in the room as I gently adjusted the daisies in the centerpiece, the movement casual yet deliberate, demonstrating that calm, measured actions can communicate strength and awareness without a single word. And I permitted myself a quiet, inward smile, acknowledging that while Samantha and Wade had believed themselves to hold influence, every subtle action they had taken was now understood, cataloged, and accounted for in my mind, and the quiet satisfaction came not from triumph over them, but from the knowledge that observation, patience, and steady composure had shaped the evening's course, creating a balance where awareness and insight quietly prevailed. And as the soft murmur of conversation continued, I felt the full weight of presence, the calm authority that comes from understanding, and I allowed the room to settle around that stillness, the shadows of the chandelier stretching across the table, reflecting a measured equilibrium where no detail went unnoticed, no gesture unexamined, and where the deliberate orchestration of patience, observation, and composure had quietly ensured that the evening concluded with clarity, dignity, and a subtle but unmistakable assertion of influence.